The Welder Who Shook the World. Ted Nelson and the 50-million-hour gun, estimated time 0.00, 3 to 30. Narrator. The year is 1941. The world is balanced on a knife's edge. In Europe, the war machine is roaring. In America, the response is a frantic, deafening cacophony of production. If the United States is going to defend freedom, it must build a fleet faster than any nation in history. And nowhere is this pressure felt more keenly than in the colossal, sprawling Mare Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo, California. Here, among the dust and the heat of the steel construction, worked a man named Edward Ted Nelson. He was just a welder, earning a humble $11 a day, yet he carried a frustration that no paycheck could soothe. Nelson was tasked with working on the backbone of the Navy's defense, submarines, and specifically, the most tedious, archaic process in the entire shipyard, installing the wooden decks. Transition to detail. Imagine this. To attach the wood to the steel hull, the crew had to drill holes, feed long bolts through, and then, most maddeningly, a secondary crew had to work below the deck. This required massive, complicated scaffolding to be built inside the cramped, dark compartments of the submarine. Workers below deck, standing on these fragile structures, had to struggle for hours, coordinating with the crew above, just to twist nuts onto bolts. It was a time sink, a labor-intensive task that took the better part of a week, days of coordination, scaffolding construction, and back-breaking bolt work. To Ted Nelson, a man who saw solutions where others only saw tradition, this inefficiency was madness. Time was the enemy, and this process was wasting it by the thousands of hours. He knew deep in his gut that if America was going to fight a two-ocean war, they couldn't afford this luxury of slowness. Estimated time, 3:30. 8. Narrator. Nelson's mind, honed by 15 years in machine shops, was turning the problem over and over. Why use two sides when you only needed one? Why struggle with nuts and bolts when you had the power of electricity and fusion? His idea, when it struck him, was shockingly simple and utterly revolutionary. The stud welding gun. He envisioned a handheld device that could weld a threaded stud, essentially a headless bolt, directly onto a steel surface in a fraction of a second. The real stroke of genius wasn't the gun, but its consumable secret, a small, hollow ceramic flux cap, or ferrule. This cap would be placed over the end of the stud. When the trigger was pulled, the cap would shield the weld pool from contaminants, focus the heat, and ensure a clean, strong, instantaneous fusion. This meant the entire operation could be performed from above. No scaffolding. No crew below deck. No coordination. Just one quick, blinding flash of light, and the fastener was permanent. This simple innovation promised to save thousands of man-hours per ship. Transition to rejection. Nelson, convinced he held the key to wartime efficiency, took his designs to the Navy supervisors at Mare Island. The Navy's response was immediate and crushing. Rejection. They were a bureaucracy built on rigid, established specifications. They told him his proposal violated rigid specifications. They told him experts had been working on this problem for decades. They told him, in essence, that an 11-a-day welder couldn't possibly be smarter than Navy protocol. Nelson received a formal letter noting his suggestion had been forwarded, with a realistic assessment that the review process typically took 18 to 24 months. By then, the war would be over or lost. Estimated time. 8 13. Narrator. Ted Nelson. Angry and disillusioned, refused to let bureaucracy bury a solution his country needed. He didn't argue with the bureaucrats. He quit. On June 20th, 1941, he resigned from Mare Island and took his ingenuity home. He cleared a space in his small garage in Vallejo and, pouring his own meager savings into the project, he became his own engineer, prototype builder, and tester. He built the first stud welding gun himself. And by May 1941, it worked. It was crude, but it was functional. It welded studs in every position, horizontal, vertical, overhead, in less than a second, with a strength that exceeded traditional bolted connections. Nelson incorporated the Nelson Specialty Welding Equipment Corporation and started selling his rejected idea to a skeptical world. Initial sales were painfully slow. He was a small, unknown company pushing a radical change. Private shipyards, while eager for efficiency, hesitated to adopt a brand new technology that wasn't approved. Transition to Pearl Harbor. Then, on December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor changed the market forever. The United States was suddenly plunged into a war of survival. Time was no longer money. Time was lives. Every bottleneck in the shipbuilding process became a national liability. Shipyard managers, now desperate, scrambled for any advantage. They remembered the tenacious Welder and his mad gun. The skepticism vanished. Massive demand erupted overnight. Shipyards like Kaiser, Bethlehem Steel, and even his former employer, Mare Island, were calling. They didn't care about rigid specifications anymore. They only cared about speed and delivery. Ted Nelson's time had finally come. Estimated time: 13/20/30. Narrator: The integration of stud welding into naval construction was nothing short of a revolution. The immediate and measurable impact was stunning. Submarine deck installation. The job that required 12 workers and 6 days could now be completed by 3 workers in one single day. Labor, the elimination of scaffolding saved multiple days of construction and freed hundreds of workers for other vital tasks. By late 1942, just over a year after Nelson quit his job, the Navy officially recognized the monumental impact of his technology. A delegation of officers arrived at his factory to present him with a citation for exceptional contribution to the war effort. They credited his invention with saving over 5 million man-hours in ship construction in that first year alone. It was a stunning vindication. As the war progressed, the technology spread from submarines to all naval vessels, aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. It was used not just for wooden decks, but for pipe hangers, cable supports, and equipment mounts. The production figures became legendary. Shipyards that implemented stud welding achieved unprecedented speed. The champion submarine builder, Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, achieved the impossible, launching 4 submarines in a single day on January 27, 1944. This was powered by a multitude of innovations, with stud welding as a critical enabling technology. The massive Essex-class aircraft carriers, the backbone of the Pacific Fleet, required roughly 20,000 stud-welded attachments each. Nelson's rejected gun had become a permanent, essential part of the American arsenal. Estimated time: 2030, 26/30. Narrator: But the true measure of Nelson's contribution can be found in the sheer scale of the war effort. His process contributed to the construction of not only combat vessels but also the workhorse of the merchant fleet, the Liberty ship. The Maritime Commission produced a staggering 2,610 Liberty ships during the war. Each one required thousands of stud-welded connections. At the peak of production, American shipyards launched 3 new ships every single day. This incredible volume was only possible through radical efficiencies, and stud welding was at the forefront. The Navy's final, conservative estimate of the cumulative savings attributed to this simple innovation is a number that demands attention: 50 million man-hours. 50 million hours of labor, time that was instead channeled into building more planes, more guns, and more ships faster. This achievement earned the Nelson Specialty Welding Equipment Corporation multiple Army-Navy E awards for excellence in production, a rare distinction given only to the top companies contributing to the war effort. Transition to human element. Beyond the steel and the numbers, Nelson's gun had an equally significant impact on the people building the ships. As men went off to fight, women flooded the shipyards. While Rosie the Riveter is the icon, the reality included the Wendy the Welders. Stud welding required less skill than traditional welding or complex bolt installation. With minimal training, new workers, women, often taking on industrial roles for the first time, could perform the stud welding operation quickly and reliably, boosting the wartime workforce efficiency and contributing directly to the final victory. Estimated time, 26:30. 30. Narrator. When the war ended, Ted Nelson's innovation did not fade. He successfully transitioned his technology to the peacetime industry, applying stud welding to construction, securing shear connectors to beams for skyscrapers, automotive, fastening components throughout vehicle bodies, industrial fabrication, becoming a standard practice across the globe. His company thrived post-war, and in 1950 he sold it to the industrial giant TRW, a sale that made him financially secure. Crucially, the brand name endured, Nelson Stud Welding. Ted Nelson's story is the ultimate example of the power of a single, rejected idea. It was born of frustration, dismissed by bureaucracy, and ultimately saved 50 million man-hours that helped turn the tide for the Allies. He didn't seek fame or glory. He simply sought a better way. He was just a welder who refused to accept inefficiency. And in doing so, he became one of the greatest and most unsung innovators of the Second World War. His legacy lives on every time a ship is built, a skyscraper rises, or a worker asks the simple, profound question that started it all. There has to be a better way.